I was thinking about my own experience with the social forum. I was the National Communications Coordinator.
Yes, you were in your 6 inch
Whoa.
heels, baby.
Yes, you were.
And just kind of because I'm the watcher of story
Yes.
and wanting to put stories that aren't usually told,
Yeah.
make them, bring them alive.
Yes.
And that was part of bringing us all together. But also recognizing that so many of us come to movements to fill or to find a way in the life that we didn't get or didn't have.
Yes.
Right? And so what I recognize about what so many of us did coming out of that year, 2010, AMC also happened that same year, so there was a lot happening, was that so many of us looked around and said, we can't find it or do it all here.
Yes.
We have to go and get some tools and skills, find ways to take care of ourselves, so then we can come and be with each other, and then also share those tools together.
Yeah.
Because you're not gonna find it all here this way when you're saying, I need you to replace my arm.
That's right.
Come on.
And speaking of that, right, like what it looks like to actually go in and find your own salve
Yes.
and then bring it back to others.
That's right.
It feels like that's part of what has happened in Detroit.
Yeah.
And Grace was talking about that in our last discussion.
Yes.
And so here's the second quote.
Okay.
Okay.
Article segues. You got a gift of segues.
Thank you. Journalism background.
I love it.
With indigenous storytelling combined, right? Okay.
The segue again.
Here's what Grace said. It's not about critical mass, but critical connections. The idea of starting out small to develop the depth and quality of relationship that can then move people into action.
Yeah.
I'd love to open up to reactions. Let's dance. See what?
I learned that from everybody in this room, and I always give ill credit for this quote, but they have since told me that it was someone else's quote, which I think is Lottie's Beatty. I'm not sure, but anyway, that quote that it is better to be an inch wide and a mile deep than a mile wide and an inch deep.
Yes.
Like I carry that everywhere I go. I think I learned it almost a decade ago from this movement space, and it's just been, it gives me hope that the work that we're doing is, we might not have the wins that we deserve, but it gives me hope that the work that we're doing is meaningful and important. And I just have this vision that there's so many of us, like so many pockets of us, like doing like the same thing. Like there's another group of brilliant, badass women sitting somewhere else having a discussion similar to this, And so it's just one of those things where it's like, wow. And I learned that every time I go and travel, basically. There was this quote my third grade, I'll end on this. There was this quote my third grade teacher had on the wall. And I have kept this with me since third grade. Like I used to walk in, she'd have us sit in a circle on the floor. Her name was Mrs. Gardner. And we would sit on a circle on the floor. And then she had this quote on the wall. And it was like, a friendship begins at the moment when one person says to another, "What, you too? I thought I was the only one." And it was just right there, big on the wall, and I just always memorized that. And it feels similar, It's like I know I'm not alone, even when I feel like I might be alone in a moment, Yeah.
I learned this from Shay, definitely.
Shay.
And it was like coming into Detroit summer,
Yes.
right? Like in contrast to the student organizing, the big protest mobilization organizing I was doing, and like Detroit summer being this place where the organizing was relational.
Yeah.
And that was like first and foremost, was the relationship building. And I think when, in my late teens, early 20s, and maybe Ill or Nandi or other people who were, my age, we were always like, we need to be doing more organizing. We need to like do political education, and get like, and I feel like you were always like, we just need to be building relationships. Meaningful relationships. It's not about like perfect political education, analysis, la la la. And I think that has like carried through in, you know, the work that I do inside of AMP, and I think is like at the heart of what we've tried to create inside the Allied Media Conference is this container for critical connections and relationships that are going to bear amazing fruit
Yes.
over decades.
Yeah.
It's not going to be about like, no, you've built, you know, like in maybe an Alinsky style way of like, you made the relationship, now target them with the ads. Get them out on the streets. You know, it's like the super transactional approach
Yes.
where all the work that we're doing, I don't think would be possible if anyone had tried to organize us in that form.
Exactly.
It's just fundamentally different.
Oh, shit. Definitely wouldn't be sustained, for sure.
Right.
Well, of course, it comes from Meg Wheatley.
Exactly.
That, I mean, you know, just to put that out. But, you know, I do think about,
Or she said it. You know,
She
what I'm
said
saying?
it,
yes,
but
I shouldn't, gotcha.
people were
It doesn't
doing
come
it,
from,
exactly.
people were doing it, but
Yes.
she crystallized it.
Exactly.
And for Grace, it made the shift from the mechanical mass
Yes.
imagery of movement. It gave her a language to think about the difference between critical mass and critical connection. I do think critical mass isn't so bad now.
Right.
You know,
Yeah.
I mean, in this decade, one thing that stands out to me was the Women's March after Trump became president on his inauguration. I don't want to say elected.
Select.
Right.
But what stood out to me, did anybody else go to? 'Cause I know
I went to a
March?
local one here, not the one in
I
DC.
went to the one in DC.
Yeah.
Me and Myrtle and Kim and Michaela and Marisol. We all went. We had a little caravan. There was a lot that was interesting, but almost everybody came in a small group.
Yes.
People did not go there by themselves. They went in little groups.
Yeah.
But the other thing was the number of people who obviously weren't, whatever their signs said. You know, I support immigrants, and it looked
Right.
like a suburban woman.
Yeah.
I support queer black men, and it looked
Yeah.
like a little Latino girl.
Yeah.
You know, it was just, people had this sense of wanting a connection beyond themselves in relation to what they saw was this incredibly divisive, disgusting
Yes.
moment. So, you know, I think about the word you used, Jane, about containers. How do we create the containers now that allow for those kinds of connections beyond our own wounds, beyond our own, because that's where we are. If we're only about ourselves, you know, then we're pretty limited.
I agree. I think it also opened up an opportunity that was a heightening contradictions moment, right? Which, you know, you all always talk about. And it was like, okay, there's this mass mobilization of white women at this women's march, but then also they were the most predominant voters for Trump. And so it was an opportunity to heighten that contradiction as well and be like, okay, how can we get this critical mass mobilization of folks to then challenge the ones who put him in selected him for office, as an example. And so I was very, because I participated in the march here, which ironically which was another heightening contradiction, because the march happened here in Detroit, which is 80% black, and most of the participants were white women. And so it was just another example of interrogating why we might not be in the streets for particular things, and like what types of levels of dehumanization has happened to Detroiters. And what, you know, we know now, like the median income here, as an example, is $26,000 a year.
Right.
So like the expectation that these predominantly black women-led households who are barely making, I mean, like $26,000 a year is a median. So you got people way below that.
Right.
Not having, it took me back to Occupy when people were asking me to come out into the streets, and I was like, come out into the streets? Like, I feel like I'm in the streets when I'm at home. I don't have this or this or this, you know. And so yeah, I think it's all, you know, it's definitely the both and, like the folks who can do that, I'm all for it. But then also, where's the heartening for the folks who are trying to figure out how from their living room to be participatory
Yep.
within their own democracy. And so, yeah, so it's just, it's been a lot of that since then. Like,
Yeah.
you know, how to have the conversation, all of the conversations at one time.
Well, and I think that's actually to me, I'm like, we do need critical mass. And I say this often that I'm like, we don't have the numbers that we need right now for the work that is, to stop what's happening and to actually reshift things. And I think in part don't have it because when people try to enter movement, we're looking for perfection of analysis, a perfect way of being like, you can't make any missteps or we'll cancel you, we'll throw you right out of here.
Yeah.
If your feminism isn't, you use the wrong pronouns or, there's a lot of things that people do that we're just like, that's it. And I think the critical connection to me, when I think of like, okay, what does that mean? That has become like the core question I've been working on for this past decade is like, how do you create a space in which critical connection can actually happen, right? Like what is, as a facilitator, I think about like, oh, what small micro moves can I make that allow for an authentic connection to happen instead of a surface level one? And how can I bring people from, whatever it takes to be like, I'll sign this petition to like, I'll show up somewhere physically. I'll show up somewhere and take a risk. I'll take an arrest, or I'll show up and cook for you, or I'll show up. I think about Sawatu, our sister going through this process of being accused of a crime and imprisoned for this, and the process of watching like, we don't know what we need to know about this legal system, but all these different people are going to knit together and bring different components of it, from the legal to the miraculous to the journalistic to whatever it is, and we're going to figure it out and we're going to get it right back out of there. But it's like, that's critical connection, right? Like so often people invite folks to movement, they're like, I want you to come and say what I say, or say what Mark said, or say what
I
someone
want you
else
to come
said.
and be quiet.
Come and be quiet.
We've already made the decisions.
We've made the decisions, but we need to know.
I'll tell you about them.
Exactly.
After we bore you for 2 hours.
Exactly. Here's a report. We already did that. And I'm like, I know for me, I got tired of movement like that. I was like, that's not who I am. I'm a singer who's supposed to be writing musicals, and I'm here trying to do right by the movement. Like, please do not don't bore me. Don't make it horrible for me. I'm not ahistorical, but I'm not a historian either. I want to trust the historian so I can be a futurist. Like, how do we hold the complexity of who people are? But what I have found is I'm like, critical connections are not impossible to build. It's actually not that hard. And people get so, we don't have time for that. We've got to do the real work. And it's like the real work consistently falls apart because it's not connected. When the pressure comes, it all falls apart and you turn on each other and you start battling it out on social media. I also think about this, like, how do we use social media to grow numbers and authentic connection? And I don't think we figured that out yet. How good it's been since Meilu came into our lives, Jenny's little one, because Meilu will just knock on my door or just walk in. And she'll just come in and I'm like, I have a critical connection with this 3-year-old who, her sense of boundaries is very different, and her sense of timing, she's like, I don't really care what else is going on in your life.
More important.
Look, did you see, yesterday she stopped by and she was like, look at my boots. They are sparkling. It's a sparkling bow. And it was just like, whatever, I was like stressed and having like a bad day, and I was kind of in the commitment of the bad. I was like, this day is bad. And then she came and I was like, or it's sparkly boots day. I mean, like, really, but I feel like also that's the kind of complexity that comes from real connection, where you're like, I will let you change my mood, I will let you change my state, and I will let you change my beliefs. And like, if we don't have connections like that, I don't think we'll get to a mass that matters. Like, I think we could get the numbers that might oust Trump, and then we'll just end up back in the same shit.